Okay, it's been a while since I've done any work or updates on this radio project, the jukebox project. So this video is going to be hopefully getting this thing running. Um, I just, my dad had some old speakers and he bequeathed to me when he moved. So these speakers are, gosh, Pioneer CS99As. I don't know what that means really, but they're heavy. I mean, I don't know, 60 pounds a piece, easy. MDF with walnut veneer, and although it's a little lighter color, I think they just need to be cleaned up, maybe some new finish on it, because that walnut is going to match the walnut on this cabinet. It won't have the burl pattern, of course, at the front, but it's the same kind of veneer. They just need to be cleaned up. I actually, before I thought about starting this, I started cleaning this one up a little bit. Just getting, I mean, when I say cleaning it up, I'm talking just some degreaser and water right now, no sanding or anything like that, but just getting some of the junk off of it. And this one I have to cover off. But there's going to be some repairs, so this speaker in particular has been dropped on both corners, which has distorted the MDF, swelled it out a little bit, and cracked the veneer. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to fix that yet, and even when I'm done, I know it won't look perfect, but I'm going to try to mask that, cover it up. I might put a few small pieces of veneer in there if I can straighten that MDF enough, and maybe even use some wood filler to fill out the areas where it's kind of smashed in. Not really sure. The other part is the electronics over here. So I've gone through a couple of different renditions. I think I told you on the last time, I wasn't really enamored with that touch screen. This is the third one. I'm pretty sold on this one. It works the best of all of them. It still works better with a mouse or remote to have both of those working. Of course, as a recap, that's the actual computer that does the work. So it's going to come from the computer through this digital analog converter board, through those wires, into this little preamp, which I wanted so that I could have some volume tone controls. I'm going to mount those tone controls on the front of the machine. So I'm going to probably desolder these little 50K pots from here, use these other 50K pots that will mount to the front of my jukebox. Comes out of the preamp, goes to the main amplifier. From there, I'll go through a small speaker protect board, because those are some pretty nice high-end speakers. And I have a few various switches, selectors, knobs, things like that. Because everything's going to be powered through a power strip, so it'll have a control relay. So just a momentary on-off switch to power on this relay. So if there's a power outage or something like that, it goes out. It's not going to come back on if the power blinks. You'll have to go turn it back on and boot it back up, because it's a computer. So I'll catch you up when I get a little bit further. So this is my third rendition of trying to clean this stuff up and simplify it as much as possible. The main reason for that, this is just a wiring diagram of the power supplies, not speaker wiring or any of the minor stuff. But yeah, the main reason is it requires so many different power supplies. So the DAC and the Arduino and that screen all take 5 volts DC. This preamp board right here takes plus 15 volts and minus 15 volts AC fed through that transformer, which I've got plugged into the mains. The main amplifier here takes 24 volt, well, somewhere between 19 and 48, but I've got it on 24 volt DC right now, fed through that DC power supply. And there's a speaker protect board right here, which takes 12 volts AC, which I've just got fed through that little variable transformer over there, and then a short circuit protection. So the reason why we're looking at this and we're seeing that it's actually playing, here's the volume thing, but we're not hearing anything out of these speakers, even though you can see the amps on and everything, is a speaker protect board. That red LED right there, that means there's a problem. That green LED should be lit, the red LED not. And the reason for that is because there's too much DC voltage coming out of that big power amplifier, and it would damage the speakers. Yeah, so I'm going to try to show you this here with using my chopstick move. All right, so there's one channel. Look at that, 4.7, almost 5 volts. And the other side, the other channel is exactly the same way of DC, which would be really, really bad for speakers. So that's the reason for that speaker protect board. Not really sure what that usually means. From what I understand is these coupling capacitors right here are leaking, and they're letting DC through, which only should be AC, of course, going to your speakers. It's a brand new power amplifier. I didn't pay a lot of money for it or anything. You can buy these boards pretty cheaply off AliExpress, but I don't know if I want to. I don't know. I might try to troubleshoot a little bit and see, but I don't know how I'm going to spend on that before I just try to figure something else out. I mean, because the amplifier doesn't have any sort of preamp circuit with it, that's why I got this preamp board, so that I could have some separate volume and tone, treble and bass control, stuff like that. Eventually, the entire thing is going to be fed through. I've got a selector switch in order, and it's going to come through a control relay right there. And I've got some ways I'm going to integrate some various transformers and power supplies and all that to power all this stuff up through one relay and one switch. We're not going to, mess with all those different kinds of things inside the cabinet. But I'm a little bit stumped. I'm definitely disappointed because, like I said, I've got a good part of a day in this because I've redone it 3 times to try to simplify things and make it work. Well, I mean, that's just where we're at. That's where we're at. This is where it's going to fit inside. Those are the speakers it's going to power. It's going to be a monster. And I was hoping to have a good amplifier for this. But thank goodness I went with the speaker protection. And that's not even the board I was going to use. So that's a 2-channel. It's only like 2 amp board or something. It's a small board. These, I think, are 30 amps. And I bought one of these a few months ago when I was thinking about this, not realizing it was only for 1 channel, so I just ordered another one of those. And those are like $20 a piece, so they're a bit more expensive, whereas this little blue one is $4 or something, not too much. So anyway, once I figure this out and get some more stuff going, I'll be in touch. Since this mess isn't really working like I'd hoped, this was, after all, Plan B, I'm going back to Plan A. Plan A was I had bought this like a mid-90s Pioneer receiver because it had a good amplifier, and I don't remember how many watts it is and all this stuff. But when I took it apart and looked at it before, there's just so much going on in here that I abandoned it and tried to simplify things by going with those boards. It's, there you go. But because all I really need out of here, so here's the volume pot, here's my preamp stuff. I might need one of these buttons because I'm just going to use probably a CD input for my DAC output from the Raspberry Pi. Of course, I'll need the speaker outs and then the on switch, which is that little thing there. So I'll still use probably a selector switch to replace that with. This stuff is going to be a bit of a challenge because those little pots are I think I'll get like 7 conductor ribbon cables and try to just use these exact same pots and remove them instead of trying to find other ones and solder to those. Now I don't want to complicate things that much. And this it's fairly heavy, but it fits in there pretty well. Once I disassemble all of it, I'll have to have some way to, I don't know, mount this face board. I can't get rid of it because everything is so intertwined. Anyway, it's a lot more than I wanted, but if I can make this thing work, I own it. I don't know if that's a speaker protect circuit. I do remember when I first got into this and was starting thinking about it, I had trouble finding a wiring schematic for this thing. So I'm going to get back into that, see if I can find a wiring diagram. That would help me determine what I can get rid of and what I need to keep, and the best way to replace things if I need to, because I can see what they're actually going to and what they do. So I'll be in touch. I'm not sure why I had so much trouble finding schematics for this the first time around. Probably using my phone instead of the computer where you can see things better. So this morning I easily found the service manual, got the schematics up there, going through and testing things out with Plan A. So everything seems to work good. I can't play very much because of the YouTube algorithm. so I can't just leave that on. But anyway, is how it should be with the speaker protect circuit. You can see the green light is on down there, and now when I put in my chopstick maneuver here, I got 0.001 volts DC on that channel, and it's that without the lead, so it means zero basically. And I checked both channels. There's 0 volts DC coming out of this amp. Much better quality amp. Still not, you know, what I would love to have, something from the 70s. So next thing is well, there's two things really that are complicating stuff. So one is I want to have one switch turn everything on. So turns on the Raspberry Pi, the DAC, turns on the screen, turns on the speaker protection circuit, turns on the amplifier, everything at once. That's easy for most things, but this amplifier has got a momentary switch right here. So that makes things a little bit more complicated because I've got to have, you know, one selector switch or rocker or something. It's got to activate a momentary, right? So press a button for a second and let back off and maintain everything else. So that might require a little bit of a circuit. Not exactly sure what I'm going to do with that yet. Next things I've got to do is, obviously this volume control is not just a potentiometer, it's got a motor on it. Not exactly sure how that works, but so I've got all these ribbon cables. So I've got to use this volume knob, and like I said, I can substitute something else for that switch. I'm not too concerned about that. But I do have to relocate a few things. And I'm going to need to use, I think, that CD button, because when I first power this up, it comes up as a tuner. So then you've got to be able to access that button to turn it into to activate the inputs for the CD, which is from the DAC there. What I did decide to do, I have these old ribbon cables over here from an old controller or something. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do, cut those ribbon cables down to however many conductors these are, try to extend these things. I'm not sure if I can get those connectors anymore because they're probably from the early 90s, maybe even late 80s. I'm not exactly sure when this thing was made, but judging by the style, I'm going to say late 80s, early 90s. So that's going to be a little bit complicated. And then I'm going to leave the motherboard mounted on that steel base because it's got nice big heat sinks mounted on it, this heavy power transformer mounted on it, all that stuff. That works well. I'm going to have to make up some smaller mounts for these ancillary boards because, you know, like I said before, there's a little bit of brain in all this, and I don't know what I can cut away and what I can't. And I know I have to keep this front register board, and I don't want to see that in my jukebox. It's just got to be hidden inside here. So next steps are figuring out how to put all that stuff in here, make some knobs and switches. I'm reticent about how many holes I want to make in the front of this. So there's going to be a power selector in the middle. Right now there's only 3 holes in it because it was just an AM radio before. So there's going to be at least 3. You've got the tone control, bass control, the treble control, mid-range control. You got, I don't know if I'm going to even put the fade or, you know, the balance knob on there. But I probably need a button for the CD and the volume. I think that's it. So trying to make that, I'd love for it to look, you know, as original as possible with just having better guts in it. I'm just not sure. Like I said, I'm reticent to just start drilling a bunch of holes in there. But either way, none of those things are going to be able to be attached to where it is now because the amplifier is going to go in this bottom section where the speaker used to go in here, and then all of the knobs and switches are going to go in that top section over there. The Raspberry Pi, the DAC, the other electronics going in the top section over there. And then what I'll probably do for the speaker outputs here is I'll probably just leave all this stuff soldered on the board and get another set basically, and attach a set of probably screw terminals onto the back for the speakers, because I mean, I don't need speaker sets A and B. It's just going to be one set. So All right, I'll be in touch. This is my test setup. I had to bring it in here in the house and use my home computer because that cheap laptop I bought to do out in my shop is a Chromebook, and unbeknownst to me, programs don't really work on Chromebooks. You have to have a Windows-based thing, and they're not Windows-based. So I have to program anything, any microcontrollers on my home computer there. So anyway, here's my setup. You'll see it better in detail probably once I have the relays and all that stuff on there, but just a quick brief how I had to do it. So I've got the little Arduino Uno programmed right there. And for the outputs, the orange, green, and white wires are going to those meter leads. Those are relay or outputs to some relays. Right now I just have my 3 meters hooked up to it so I can see what's happening. I have a little bitty on switch right here. So the idea is this meter is the total power to the unit. So this is representing 120 volt relay, which is going to power up amplifier and the delay boards and the 5-volt power supplies for the Arduino, all this stuff. This one is the standby button for the Pioneer amplifier. So you have to push this one. It's a momentary button so that, or once it's powered up, this takes it out of standby or puts it back in standby. And it's like I said, one momentary. And then this is another momentary button because the Pioneer amplifier, when you first turn it on and bring it to standby, well, if you have to power it up completely, it comes in as a tuner. And I don't want to use it as a tuner. I want to have the CD input only. So this is a momentary button to push that turns it to a CD player, or CD input. Sorry. So that's all I do. Let's see here. So I push the on button. You can see the main power powers up. A couple seconds later, here comes the momentary. It's on off, and the CD momentary on, and then back off. So I may shorten the delay times on each of those by about a second later. And then, the maintained switch is stayed on. So this is our 120 volt circuit still on. Now I push the button again, and that one goes off. Nothing else changes. And I can do that as often as I want to. I'll see you in the shop. Well, we're ready for the next step in testing phases. All of this rat's nest, which is none of it permanent wiring, is just to see how well it works here on the test bench. We saw that the Arduino controlled the relays on my indoors just fine. Here's a basic rundown of what we're doing. So you get a schematic, the 120 volt circuit coming in, powering a few things, going through a couple of relay contacts. Then we've got the 12 volt DC stuff, which I've got to keep constant power on that for the Arduino for the switch to work. But the on light switch, I only want that to come on when one CR, the 120 volt relay, comes on and these things all power up. And then a basic Arduino 5 volt circuit. There's certainly a few more wires than that out here, but that allows me to set everything up into this mess that you see right now. I decided to use the original power supplies for the Raspberry Pi and the screen because they're mini USB connectors and not the regular 12 volt DC 5.5 volt connectors. So I just didn't feel like getting into that, and I thought, well, hopefully those things will last for a few years before I have to replace them, and by then who knows if this is the same amp I'll be using. I don't know. So what I've done to make this amp work for this is I've cut the ribbon cables. This is the volume control board right here, and I've added extensions onto these ribbon cables using some Molex connectors on both sides of it. Right here's one. And then I took the treble and the bass knobs off and made some ribbon connectors, soldered those directly to the board there. I think that's all the controls I'm going to care about having on the front. I've got some wires going into the power switch and going into the CD switch, which come over here to a couple of these relay modules. So what we expect to happen here is when I push the start button, the on button, the Arduino is already going to be powered up once I plug it in. I push that, we're going to power up one relay module, which is going to be maintained, and that's going to power the entire 120 volt side. And then we have a second module, which is going to be a momentary module for 1 second. That's just going to push the power standby button on the amplifier to bring it out of standby into the power mode. And then the other one is going to put it into CD mode. This is the new speaker protector board that I've got wired in here, so everything works well, and as long as there's no DC output from this amplifier, which there wasn't before, then we'll go straight from the speakers from there. I think that pretty well covers everything. Let's plug this in and see what happens. Okay. All right, so 12 volts are on. I see the Arduino's powered. Relay modules all have power. But nothing's happened over here, which is what we expect. Okay, let's push the start button. Start button is on. Our maintain switch, standby switch, CD switch. Looking over here, we're now in CD mode. It's upside down because of the bracket that I made holds this thing upside down a lot better. Well, I say a lot better. The ribbon cables were too short to flip it over in any other way. And I didn't want to try to make more of those. Powering up, slowly power up. Looking good so far. Bring you back in a second when this thing powers up the rest of the way. And here we are. Looks like everything's powered up. We'll go to my music. Oh. See, it did give me an error that said no network found. Apparently, it won't boot up properly if it's not sensing my home Wi-Fi, which I don't really know how that worked before. I changed my Wi-Fi router at home, and I haven't taken this whole thing inside to plug it in and change it over yet. So I thought that happened earlier than the last test. Maybe not. Well, regardless. Okay. That was a good finger shot. Now, I should push the same button and it should all shut down. Well, that's not promising there. It didn't shut down, did it? It just went through the startup sequence again. Let's hold that in a second. I don't think I'm crazy. I'm pretty sure when I test ran all this stuff inside at my desk, running the program on the Arduino through the computer, when it was still powered through my computer, that it all worked. It shut down. Looks like I'm disconnecting several things, taking it back inside the house where my network is, and checking a few things out. All right, well, anyway, I'll be excited to get this rat's nest off the desk and packed away inside of a jukebox somewhere so I can start something else up here and leave it out for months at a time. Catch up with you next time. Well, here we are back out of the shop. I say 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but they're important step forward. So what I figured out about the relays and the Arduino was I just had to add a time delay, 100 millisecond time delay to the switch, because apparently when you push the button, there can be some current oscillations within the Arduino there, and it can cause us to do some strange things. That took me about 20 minutes, I guess, to figure out, put that in, that fixed that, no big deal. Where I spent all my time was on this crazy Raspberry Pi computer board. That wasn't that fun, and I thought that was going to be the easy one because I had changed the router in the house, so of course I had a new, whatever you call it, WPA, whatever the new router license and all that stuff. So I thought, well, I'll just take that in, plug it into the Ethernet, tap into it, and change the Wi-Fi settings in the router, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, 3 hours or so later of focus on this crazy thing and going back and forth and troubleshooting, I was definitely frustrated with it. And come to find, this, I don't know, I would put in the Wi-Fi, the new Wi-Fi IP and all this stuff, and it said it was working, and the terminal on my router would say it was working, and then I would unplug it from the router, take the landline off, and it was still working. My terminal says it was working, no problem. I'd go to reboot it, it wouldn't boot up. It's like, what in the world? I went to bed last night, I got up this morning, plugged it in, just did not plug it into the landline, just left it on Wi-Fi only just to see what would happen while I ate my breakfast, and the thing booted up and started working and started playing. I said, oh gosh. So I said, okay, maybe it just needed to sleep on it. I don't know. So I plugged in the screen and the ancillaries and all the stuff and rebooted the thing again, and nope, wasn't going to happen. So I went back to the landline, and sure enough, the Wi-Fi IP was missing again out of the Raspberry Pi. I thought I was just, I don't know, I couldn't think of what else was going on. I just hate these things. So then I thought about, I had just bought a little Wi-Fi dongle for my wife's computer because I moved the router across the house, and hers is no longer plugged directly in. And I thought, this thing has a little Wi-Fi board or chip or whatever on board. I thought maybe that thing's acting up. So I went and got that dongle out of her computer and put it in this, and yep, sure enough, booted right up. No problem. Now it's playing. We've got her. It's a non-issue. So I come out here, bring it all back out, wire everything back up, and then here's my step back I found out. So this amplifier, I've got 3 relays there to mimic the 3 buttons, and one of them is the standby button, just a momentary, when this thing boots up, it boots up into standby. So I thought, and because that's how it always had booted up. Today, after I turned it on and back off, it booted up into CD mode, and then my little relay, which hits the standby switch, puts it into standby. So I'm thinking, well, I thought maybe just the big old filter caps and the line filter caps and things like that are holding enough charge on there where it's not going all the way down. Went and ate lunch 2 hours later, came back out, fed the fish, fed the turtles, all that stuff, came back out, and it still booted up as into CD mode. I better turn this down. I wasn't thinking about the YouTube thing. So anyway, I think what I'm going to have to do, and I can't come up with a way to really have any logic that my Arduino would know whether or not this amplifier boots up into standby or not standby. I'm not sure how I would do that. So what I'll probably end up doing is just putting a little reset switch, just a tiny momentary switch in the back side of my jukebox, so that when/if this does happen, then I'll be able to reach around and take it out of standby with that switch. It's a reset button. Or if I find out that, well, most of the time it boots up without going into standby, then I'll probably just disconnect that one little relay button and let it come up normally. And I don't know. We'll see how it goes, but not an insurmountable problem. I think at this point, I'm ready to get rid of some of this rat's nest, start mounting it all in the jukebox. Once I get it in there and get it playing, then it'll be time to figure out what I'm going to do for this screen, because I just don't want to set a plastic screen with cords coming out of it off the back of that pretty wooden jukebox. So I'll have to come up with some kind of maybe a walnut bezel that goes around that thing. And I'm thinking about, do I create some way to hide this screen when it's not in use? Do I have that Arduino operate some doors or something like that on that bezel to open or close it or raise it up or down? Or I don't really know. I'm kind of getting over this project. I kind of just want it to be done for a while, so I may not do that, but thinking about it. All right, I'll be in touch. I don't know where I've left off a couple of days ago, or yesterday, seems like a couple of days ago, but here's what I've decided to do. I figured out that I believe I can use the standby LED from the Pioneer amplifier to let me know whether or not that the unit is in standby or not. And so it's a 5-volt circuit minus the resistor in the LED. So I'm thinking I take that 5 volts from there and use that as an input on this Arduino. It can let my controller know whether or not that amp is going to power up in standby or out of standby, because as best I can tell, it's a toss-up. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, which is a real hassle when you're trying to go through a series of button sequences to turn it on or off. So here's what I've done. I've got it to where, well, I wrote a program so that you can see the voltage coming in from that circuit, and I've got it set so anything over 2.5 volts will go through the normal or the startup sequence with the standby button and then the CD button. And if it's below 2.5 volts, I'm going to assume that it's going to assume that it is not in standby, and it's just going to omit those and not touch those buttons at all. And then the other thing is on shutdown, I noticed when I shut it down and it just killed the power to the amplifier, you got this real loud pop, which doesn't sound good to me. Can't be good for it. So what I decided to do is reverse the sequence, regardless of whether it, whatever the voltage is on that standby button. Whenever you shut it off, shut the switch off, it's going to put it in standby or push the standby button and turn it off. So here we go. So we're going to push the button. What we're going to expect is this relay here is the 120 volt circuit, which is going to stay maintained the entire time. This is the standby button. This is the CD button. This is my input wire. So right now it's not in standby. Is that right? Yeah. Right now it's not powering up in standby. So when I power up the main relay here, it's going to come up and be ready to play. So I push the button. Boom, everything powers up. There's nothing on, the standby circuit. These other buttons don't get pushed. Everything is good to go. I shut it back down. You'll see it go into standby first and then turn this off. Turn off the main powers to eliminate that pop. Now if I've got 5 volts going into the board there, push the start button. 120 volts powers up. A few seconds later, there goes my standby button, taking it out of standby. There goes the CD button, making sure that it's in CD mode. Everything is playing, all that stuff. Turn it off, same thing, puts it back in standby, then powers it down. Now, last thing is, where am I going to, I can't just wire this 5 volts directly from that little LED circuit on the amplifier. It would be the wrong ground. There'd be no path for current. So what I think I can do, since that thing, it's a 5 volt circuit, but there's, I don't know, just a few milliamps, 40 milliamps, whatever. It's not going to be good for much current. If it can power that LED, it can power an opto isolator, I believe, which is basically an LED switch. And so I've ordered an opto isolator boards, and I will use that to basically switch between the 5 volts from the board to my analog input pin on the board, basis whether or not that opto isolator is powered up from the circuit. So anyway, hopefully we're back onto something. A few days later, or in a few more days, the parts should get here. I'll go back out there, rewire everything up, test it a few more times in the rat's nest configuration. Then hopefully I'm happy with it and I can start actually mounting it in the box. Because once I get it mounted in the box, I should be able to play music from it, and that'll be really satisfying, but there's still some other major things to do. Build the speaker stands, build the bezel for the screen. I'd forgotten that I plan on building an LED VU meter to go across the front, brass bezel display across that radio as well. So I still have a little while to go, but I'll be in touch. After a little more thought, I realized that when this amplifier boots up, it could boot up not in standby and as a receiver, in which case just the CD pin would need to be pushed. And the other thing I thought was, even if it does boot up in standby, I don't know how quickly that happens. So when you apply power to the amp, everything powers up. It takes a second or two before the standby light comes on. And I thought, well, I need to put some sort of delay in here so that it can look for that power from the standby pin before deciding whether or not to push the standby button and CD pin again. And the way I had it, it just sort of, it was either had to be there or not there. So I added a little bit more logic in here so that when I push the on, so this right here is the standby button. I can push that, not push that. You can't see my screen, but I'm looking at my screen and I can see the voltage goes up to 5 volts when I push it. It goes down to whatever, atmosphere, a few millivolts when I'm not pushing it. Okay, so we're going to push the on button here, and then what's going to happen is it's going to power up the entire unit, the amplifier, and of course everything in the jukebox. And then a couple seconds later, just in case it's
powered up not in standby but as an audio receiver, it's going to push the CD pin. And if it powers up as a CD a CD input and you push the CD pin, it really doesn't matter, inconsequential. But it won't power up, it won't hit the standby button. Now if it powers up with me holding this as in standby, or I should say a couple seconds later, so powers this up a couple seconds later, I'm going to push this and that puts it into standby, or says it's in standby. Then a few seconds after that, the standby button will be pushed and the CD button will be pushed again. And the CD button is going to come in first anyways for half a second, but like I said, that's just not going to matter. It makes more sense. I don't know, the program has already gotten a little bit convoluted, and I'm not going to try to excise that since it doesn't make any difference at all. You can push that CD pin on the receiver as many times as you want to. It just plain doesn't matter. Okay, so we're going to push this. Power's coming up. I'm pushing the 5 volts, so now it's in standby, booting up. And that center relay, I have like a 6-second delay on that. Perhaps it doesn't need to be that long, but I just wanted to make sure. Well, hell, I think it didn't recognize it. Let's try this again. Okay, of course I tried this out before recording it, and it did work for me, but apparently that was an intermittent. I had the delay time at the end of the first if statement when I needed to have it at the beginning of the second if statement. So, anyway, I'll go ahead and shut this back off, right? So that puts it in standby. That powers the entire thing down. We're going to do this again. So we push the start button, amp's powering up, boom, it's in standby because I'm holding it. That CD pin, like I said, it didn't really matter. A couple seconds later, that center relay, there it goes, that powered up. That took it out of standby and pushed the CD pin again. So turn it off, puts it in standby, powers it down. If no 5 volts is applied, it doesn't boot up in standby. The whole unit powers up. A couple seconds later, CD pin is pushed just in case it's in audio or receiver mode. Okay, moving on. So unfortunately, it's about a week and a half after the last little clip that I did, and the only physical change I've made is I put a pull down resistor on this standby switch so that when it's not engaged, it actually pulls it down to 0 volts instead of floats around with several millivolts, just in case that made any kind of a difference, and it did not. So I've been struggling a lot with the timer functions in the Arduino, trying to make things work, and I've been cajoling my new friend in the UK, John, with help on this timer issues with this Arduino, and he is gracious and has been helping me a lot with this. So what I'm going to do now is wrap this one up and put it online so that I can share it with John and maybe give him a better visual of what I'm trying to do, because 2 paragraphs in an email don't really do it, especially when you're trying to be brief and not take up tons of people's time. So here's a video to take up a ton of your time. Thanks, John.